He was the man who gave up everything for her success, his dreams, his career, his future. When she was done with him, she cast him aside like a worn-out shoe. At a glittering New York gala, surrounded by the city's elite, she decided to humiliate him one last time, mocking the quiet, unassuming woman by his side. She thought his new date was a nobody, a downgrade. What she didn't know, what the entire room was about to discover in the most shocking way possible, is that his new girlfriend wasn't just anybody. She was an icon, an heiress to a global empire, and her name alone could bring titans of industry to their knees. Ethan Cole measured his life in shades of grey now. His bachelor apartment in Hell's Kitchen wasn't sad exactly. It was muted. The walls were a soft architectural grey, the furniture a collection of clean lines in charcoal and slate. It was a space of control, of quiet intention, a stark contrast to the life he'd lived for 12 years with Brenda Walsh. Their life together had been a vibrant, chaotic explosion of colour, mostly dictated by her. When they met, he was the rising star at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the world. He had a vision, a touch that could turn steel and glass into poetry. Brenda was a junior broker with a ferocious ambition that burned brighter than any skyscraper on the Manhattan skyline. He'd been captivated by her fire. She called his ambition artistic. She called hers necessary. The first sacrifice was small, a partnership track opportunity in the London office. "But my career is just taking off here, Ethan," she'd said, her hand on his chest, her eyes wide with earnest appeal. "I need you. We need you here." So he stayed. He designed from New York, pulling all-nighters, his name slowly becoming synonymous with brilliant but difficult concepts that other partners would ultimately take the credit for. Then came her big break, a chance to start her own real estate development firm. The seed money was immense. His savings, a small inheritance, and a loan against his future earnings provided the foundation. "It's an investment in us," she'd promised, kissing him, amidst piles of paperwork on their dining room table, the scent of her expensive perfume, Creed's Aventus for her, filling the air. He left some. He had to. Brenda's firm, Walsh Properties, needed an in-house consultant. In reality, he became her 24/7 fixer. He vetted blueprints, smoothed over zoning board issues with his technical expertise, and redesigned entire floor plans overnight to fit her ever-changing, profit-driven whims. He was the ghost in her machine, the silent architect behind her success. Walsh Properties boomed. They moved from a cozy West Village apartment to a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue with panoramic views that made the city look like a carpet of diamonds. The colors grew louder. The parties became more lavish, the friends more transactional. Brenda traded her business suits for custom Chanel and her genuine laugh for a polished, resonant sound deployed for networking. Ethan found himself fading further into the background, the man holding her coat, the quiet husband of the brilliant Brenda Walsh. The end came not with a bang, but with a quiet clinical assessment over a $500 bottle of Chateau Margaux she'd ordered. "Ethan, we're on different paths now," she'd said, not unkindly, but with the detached air of a CEO analyzing a non-performing asset. "My world, it requires a different kind of partner, someone who can keep up." The implication was clear. He, the man who had built the engine of her success, was now considered dead weight. The divorce was swift and brutal. Her lawyers, sharks from a top-tier firm, argued that his contributions were those of a supportive spouse, not a business partner. He was left with a settlement that felt more like severance pay, a fraction of the fortune he had helped build. He was forced to sign an ironclad NDA, preventing him from ever claiming credit for his work on her flagship projects. He was in essence erased from his own history, so now he lived in grey. He'd started his own small firm, Cole Design, from a corner of his apartment. His work was picking up small residential projects and consultations, but it was a quiet, solitary pursuit. The fire that had once driven him was now just a pilot light flickering uncertainly. It was on a rainy Tuesday, seeking refuge in the Gagosian Gallery in Chelsea, that he met her. He was staring at an Anselm Kiefer painting, lost in its texture and raw historical weight, when a soft voice beside him said, "It feels like looking at a scar, doesn't it? A beautiful, terrible scar." He turned. She was wearing a simple beige trench coat, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, with a few strands escaping, to frame a face that was arrestingly beautiful. But in a way he couldn't quite place. It wasn't the sharp sculpted beauty of the models in Brenda's magazines. It was softer, more soulful. Her eyes, a warm hazel, held a startling depth. She wore no discernible makeup. "That's the perfect way to describe it," Ethan said, genuinely surprised. "I was thinking the same thing." They fell into easy conversation. Her name was Fina, she said. Just Fina. She spoke about art with an unpretentious passion that he found intoxicating. She asked him what he did, and when he said he was an architect, her eyes lit up. "You build things. You make tangible art that people can live in. That's incredible." No one had called his work incredible in a long time. Brenda had called it a means to an end. They talked for 2 hours, wandering through the gallery, until the staff began politely hinting it was time to close. As they stood outside on the wet pavement, the city lights shimmering around them, Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing so profoundly. "I don't normally do this," he began, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs. "But would you like to get a coffee sometime?" She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that seemed to push back the gloom. "I'd like that very much, Ethan." She typed her number into his phone under the name Fina. Their first date was at a small, no-name Italian place in his neighborhood. She arrived in jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and the same trench coat. She seemed fascinated by his stories of architectural challenges, of balancing physics and aesthetics. She spoke of her own life in vague but intriguing terms. She traveled a lot for work and dealt with difficult personalities. He assumed she was perhaps a corporate art buyer or a consultant for a luxury brand. He never pressed. He was too busy enjoying the simple act of being seen, of being heard. He didn't Google her name. Fina was unique, but it felt private, a name just for him. He respected that. For the first time in over a decade, he was getting to know someone without a balance sheet attached. He wasn't Brenda Walsh's husband. He was just Ethan, and she was just Fina. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, and he was terrified of breaking it. After a month of quiet dinners, long walks through Central Park, and visits to obscure museums, Fina brought up the event. "There's this charity gala," she said, swirling the wine in her glass at his apartment. "The Children's Legacy Fund. It's a work thing. I have to go make an appearance. It's usually dreadfully boring. It would be infinitely less so if you were there with me." Ethan's stomach tightened. Ayla. The very word brought back a flood of memories, standing awkwardly in a tuxedo, while Brenda networked fetching her champagne, smiling vacantly at people who looked straight through him. It was Brenda's world. "I don't know, Fina. That's not really my scene," he said, the excuse sounding weak even to himself. "Please," she asked, her hazel eyes soft and pleading, "just for an hour or two. We can sneak out early and get pizza. My treat." The thought of sharing a slice of pizza with her, after escaping a black tie event, was so incongruous, so them, that he couldn't help but smile. How could he say no? "Okay." He relented. "For you, but if anyone tries to talk to me about the commodities market, I'm faking a seizure." She laughed, a sound that filled his grey apartment with colour. "It's a deal." He had no idea that he was agreeing to walk back into the very heart of the world he had escaped. He had no idea that Brenda would be there, and he had no idea that Fina. His quiet, unassuming Fina was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of his old life, a bomb wrapped in Dior, haute couture. The muted grey of his world was about to be shattered into a million brilliant, blinding pieces. Preparing for the gala felt like putting on an old, ill-fitting costume. Ethan rented a tuxedo from a place on Madison Avenue, the process feeling clinical and foreign. The last time he'd worn one, it had been a custom Tom Ford, a gift from Brenda for their 10th anniversary. A gift, he later realized, that was more about her image than his comfort. He remembered how she'd adjusted his bow tie. Her touch, not affectionate but proprietary, as if straightening a painting on a wall. "Perfect," she'd said, looking at their reflection in the mirror. "We look like $1 billion." He remembered feeling like a well-dressed accessory. This time was different. As he adjusted the standard issue bow tie in his own mirror, he felt a nervous flutter. But it was for Fina. He wanted to look good for her. She'd told him she would meet him at the venue, the iconic Cipriani on 42nd Street, a grand, cavernous hall that had once been a bank. "It's easier with traffic and work logistics," she'd explained vaguely over the phone. When Ethan arrived, the scene was exactly as he remembered and dreaded. A river of black cars flowed to the curb, depositing men in sharp tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. The air crackled with the sound of camera flashes from the press line, the murmur of powerful people greeting each other, and the clinking of champagne flutes. It was a pageant of wealth and influence. He took a deep breath, handed his invitation to the stern-looking woman at the door, and stepped inside. He scanned the cavernous room, a sea of black and diamonds under the impossibly high, ornate ceilings. He felt a familiar wave of alienation wash over him. Then he saw her. She was standing near one of the marble pillars, talking to an older gentleman, and she took his breath away. The simple, unassuming woman he knew was gone. In her place stood a goddess. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that seemed to drink the light. It was an architectural marvel in itself, minimalist yet impossibly elegant, with a single dramatic sweep of fabric falling from one shoulder. Her honey-blonde hair was styled in a chic, intricate updo, and delicate diamond earrings glittered at her ears. She was still recognizably his Fina, but she was also more. She radiated a poise and a quiet confidence that was nothing short of regal. He suddenly felt foolish for ever thinking she was just a corporate art buyer. As if sensing his presence, she turned. Her face broke into that warm, genuine smile that was just for him, and the goddess became Fina again. She gracefully excused herself from the man she was talking to and walked toward him. "Hey you," she said softly, her eyes drinking him in. "You look very handsome. A regular James Bond." "And you," Ethan stammered. "You look—" "I don't have the words. Stunning feels inadequate." She blushed, a faint pink rising on her cheeks. "It's just a dress, all smoke and mirrors. Are you ready to brave the lion's den?" "With you, absolutely," he said, offering his arm. As she took it, he felt a jolt of pride. He wasn't an accessory tonight. He was her date. They found their assigned table, mercifully, in a slightly quieter corner of the room. Fina seemed to know a surprising number of people. Not in the way Brenda knew them, with aggressive handshakes and laser-focused eye contact, but in a more relaxed, familiar way. People would nod respectfully as she passed, their eyes widening slightly in recognition, but they kept their distance. It was odd. It was as if she was surrounded by an invisible barrier of respect. "You seem popular," Ethan commented as they sat down. "I've been coming to this event for years," she said, with a slight shrug. "It's for a good cause." They made small talk, observing the glittering parade around them. Fina pointed out a famous actress, a tech billionaire, and a notoriously reclusive artist, telling Ethan funny little anecdotes about each of them. She made this intimidating world feel small and human. For the first time ever, Ethan was actually enjoying himself at a gala. He felt the tight knot of anxiety in his chest finally begin to loosen. He was so wrapped up in her, in the easy magic of their conversation, that he didn't see them approach. Well, well, well. Ethan Cole, I never thought I'd see you at an event like this again. The voice was like ice water down his spine. It was a voice engineered for public speaking and private condescension, a voice he had tried for 2 years to forget. He looked up. Brenda Walsh stood before them, a vision in crimson red sequins, a dress that screamed for attention. Beside her, preening in a velvet tuxedo jacket, was her new partner, Grant Harrison, a hedge fund manager, known for his ruthless takeovers and his collection of gaudy Swiss watches. His wrist glittered obnoxiously under the chandeliers. Brenda's eyes swept over Ethan's rented tux with a flicker of disdain before landing on Fina. She gave her a slow, deliberate, head-to-toe appraisal, her lips curling into a smug, pitying smile. It was the look she reserved for the catering staff. Brenda, Ethan said, his voice flat. He made no move to stand. I see you're back in the game. Brenda continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She ignored Fina completely, as if she were a piece of furniture. I'm so glad to see you're getting out. I was worried about you cooped up in that dreary little apartment. Grant chuckled, a moist, unpleasant sound. You gotta hand it to him, Bren. He's resourceful. Ethan felt a hot surge of anger. He could take her insults, he was used to them. But the way she was dismissing Fina, the woman who had brought light back into his life, was intolerable. Fina remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She simply watched Brenda, her hazel eyes calm and observant, which seemed to infuriate Brenda even more. Brenda thrived on reactions, on knowing her barbs had landed. Fina's serenity was a shield she couldn't penetrate. So, Brenda said finally, deigning to look at Fina, though not addressing her directly. She spoke to Ethan, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Is this your +1? It's sweet that you're trying, Ethan. Really. I know it must be tough starting over. Budgets are tight, I'm sure. She let the insult hang in the air, a poisonous cloud. The implication was clear. Fina looked cheap. She was a downgrade. The best a man like Ethan could afford. Ethan stood up at his chair, scraping against the floor. That's enough, Brenda. Oh, am I embarrassing you? She cooed, placing a hand on Grant's arm. Grant and I were just saying how important it is to maintain standards, in business, in life, in partners. She gave Fina another dismissive glance. You get what you pay for, after all. Before Ethan could unleash the torrent of furious words building in his throat. Fina moved. She placed a gentle restraining hand on his arm. Then she looked directly at Brenda for the first time. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through Brenda's venomous aura with the precision of a diamond. It's a beautiful dress, Fina said, her gaze fixed on Brenda's crimson gown. Last season's Balmain, if I'm not mistaken. A bold choice. The comment was delivered so neutrally, yet it was a masterclass in subtle destruction. She had identified the design of the season, and with one phrase, a bold choice, rendered it utterly passé. It was the kind of coded insult the women in this room used to destroy each other, and Fina had just wielded it with surgical skill. Brenda's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She was momentarily thrown off balance. Who was this quiet little mouse to know Balmain? And you are? Brenda asked, her voice sharp and brittle. My name is Fina, she replied, simply extending a hand. Brenda ignored the offered hand. Fina, how? Quaint. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Ethan could feel the eyes of the people at the tables nearby. This was exactly what Brenda wanted, a public spectacle to cement her status and his humiliation. But something was wrong. Fina wasn't wilting. She wasn't intimidated. She was holding Brenda's gaze with an unnerving, tranquil power. The hunter had become the hunted, and she didn't even know it yet. The stage was set. The audience was watching, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama Brenda Walsh could never have anticipated. The standoff was a miniature vortex of social warfare in the grand ballroom of Cipriani. Brenda, accustomed to being the gravitational center of any room she entered, was visibly irritated by Fina's refusal to be diminished. Grant Harrison, sensing his partner's frustration, stepped forward with the clumsy swagger of a man who mistakes money for class. "Look," he said, directing his words at Ethan, but gesturing toward Fina. "It's a big night, lots of important people here. Maybe you and your friend should find a more appropriate venue. The donor list for this event is quite exclusive." He puffed out his chest, his watch catching the light. "We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place." The insult was as subtle as a sledgehammer. "You don't belong here." Ethan's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be, Grant. Why don't you and Brenda go bother someone else?" "Protective Ethan? How noble," Brenda sneered. "It's a shame you didn't have that kind of fire when it mattered." She turned her focus back to Fina, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was intentionally loud. "A little piece of advice, honey. When a man has nothing, he'll cling to anything. Don't mistake desperation for devotion." It was a kill shot designed to poison Fina's mind against him, to paint him as a pathetic leech using a naive young woman to soothe his bruised ego. And that's when it happened. It started not with a shout, but with a gasp. A man walking past their table, a distinguished figure with silver hair and a sharp suit, stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes, wide with disbelief, were locked on Fina. "Mon Dieu!" He breathed the French exclamation, cutting through the ambient chatter. He rushed to their table, ignoring Brenda and Grant completely. He took Fina's free hand in both of his, bowing his head slightly, in a gesture of profound respect. "Serafina," he said, his voice thick with a Parisian accent. "What a magnificent surprise. I had no idea you were in New York. We thought you were still in seclusion at the villa in Como." Fina smiled warmly at the man. "Antoine, it's lovely to see you. I wanted a quiet evening." Brenda and Grant froze. The name Antoine registered first. Anyone with even a passing interest in high fashion or photography knew the name Antoine Levy. He was a living legend, the man whose lens had defined beauty for 3 decades. His portraits graced the covers of every Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Vanity Fair on the planet. For Antoine Levy to show this level of deference to anyone was unthinkable. Then the other name registered, Serafina. It was a name spoken in reverent tones in the circles Brenda desperately wanted to conquer, a name that was a brand in itself. Brenda's perfectly made-up face went slack. Her eyes darted from Antoine to Fina, the gears of her ruthlessly ambitious mind grinding, refusing to process the data. It wasn't possible. The woman in the simple, elegant blue dress, the quiet woman sitting with her pathetic ex-husband. It couldn't be her. Antoine, oblivious to the drama he had just ignited, continued to beam at Fina. "Quiet evening, ma chérie. Your presence is never quiet. It is an event. You look breathtaking. Is this a new Dubois piece? Your father's work gets more brilliant every year." He gently touched the sapphire silk of her sleeve. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. Dubois, the Dubois family, the French dynasty that owned a global luxury conglomerate. Their empire encompassed everything, from the world's most exclusive haute couture house, Dubois, to Parfums Dubois, to a portfolio of vineyards, art collections, and 5-star hotels. They were old-world royalty, a level of wealth and influence that made new money players like Grant Harrison look like children in a sandbox. And Serafina Dubois, she was the face of it all. Not just an heiress, but a cultural phenomenon. A supermodel who rarely walked the runway anymore because she didn't have to. A woman so iconic, so elusive that her every public appearance was a global news story. She was known professionally by her first name alone, Serafina. The face of the legendary perfume L'Étoile du Soir. The muse for her father, the reclusive design genius Jean-Luc Dubois, a woman who dated princes and artists, who was photographed with world leaders, and whose net worth was estimated in the billions. This was the woman Brenda had just advised not to mistake desperation for devotion, the woman whose date she had pitied, the woman she had just essentially called a cheap escort. The blood drained from Brenda's face. The crimson of her dress suddenly looked garish and desperate against her now ashen skin. She looked at Seraphina Dubois, and for the first time she saw her. She saw the regal poise, the quiet confidence, the subtle but priceless diamonds, the bespoke gown that wasn't last season's Balmain, but a one-of-a-kind creation from the most exclusive atelier in the world. She had been so blinded by her own arrogance, so eager to humiliate Ethan, that she had been functionally blind. Word was spreading like wildfire. People who had heard Antoine's exclamation were whispering, pointing. Phones previously tucked away were being subtly raised over shoulders to snap photos. The low hum of the room was changing its frequency, reorienting itself around their table. A bubble of silence and awe was expanding outwards. The famous actress Fina had pointed out earlier was staring, her jaw slightly agape. The tech billionaire was murmuring to his wife. Grant Harrison looked like he'd been tasered. His face was a comical mask of shock horror and frantic calculation. He was a man who lived and died by status, and he had just mortally insulted one of the most powerful figures in that universe. He looked at Brenda with pure, unadulterated panic. Brenda, to her credit, tried to recover. It was a valiant but pathetic effort. She forced a brittle, horrifying smile. Seraphina Dubois. My goodness, what an honor. I'm Brenda Walsh of Walsh Properties. We are such admirers of your family's work. Her voice was an octave too high. The change from sneering condescension to fawning sycophancy was so abrupt it was sickening. Seraphina's gaze was cool. She didn't retract her hand, which Brenda now desperately wanted to shake, nor did she acknowledge the introduction. She simply looked at Brenda, held her gaze for a long, silent moment, and then turned her full attention back to Ethan. She squeezed his arm gently, her eyes full of a soft, apologetic light. I'm so sorry, Ethan, she murmured, for his ears only. I really did hope for a quiet evening. That small, intimate gesture was the final, devastating blow. In that single moment, Seraphina Dubois, the global icon, had dismissed Brenda and Grant as if they were nothing more than a temporary annoyance, a piece of lint to be brushed aside. She had publicly and unequivocally aligned herself with Ethan. The message to Brenda and to the entire watching room was crystal clear. This is my man. You are nothing. Brenda stood frozen, her hand still hovering in the empty space between them. The flash of a photographer's camera from across the room illuminated her face, capturing a perfect high-definition image of utter and complete humiliation. The Queen of Park Avenue had just been dethroned in the middle of her own court, not by a rival, but by the quiet girlfriend of the man she had thrown away. The rest of the evening was a blur for Ethan. The moment Seraphina's identity was revealed, their corner table became the epicenter of the New York social world. The gala's host, a formidable society matriarch named Beatrice Vanderbilt, descended upon them. Her initial annoyance at the commotion melting into effusive warmth the moment she saw Seraphina. Seraphina, my dear girl, you honor us. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? She boomed, air-kissing her with practiced ease. Her eyes flickered to Ethan, no longer with indifference, but with intense, speculative curiosity. Ethan felt like an exhibit at the zoo. People no longer looked through him. They stared at him, their expressions a mixture of awe, envy, and confusion. Who was this man? How had he a relative? Nobody captured the attention of Seraphina Dubois. He saw men who had previously ignored him, now nodding in his direction, their wives whispering behind their hands. Brenda and Grant had vanished. They had simply dissolved into the crowd, retreating in a state of shock. Ethan caught a glimpse of Brenda's crimson dress near the exit, her posture rigid with fury and shame. The image was deeply satisfyingly cathartic. Serafina, with a grace that Ethan found astounding, navigated the sudden onslaught. She was polite but firm. "Beatrice, it's lovely to see you, and this is my partner, Ethan Cole," she said, her voice clear and proud. She put a subtle emphasis on the word partner, leaving no room for misinterpretation. She introduced him to Antoine Levy, to a senator, to the CEO of a major investment bank. To each of them, she presented him not as an accessory, but as her equal. After 20 minutes of this suffocating attention, she leaned in close to his ear, her breath warm against his skin. "Remember our deal," she whispered. "I'm officially bored of this. Let's go get that pizza." And with a final polite nod to their host, she took his hand and led him not toward the main entrance, but through a side door near the kitchens. A sleek black Audi A8 with tinted windows was waiting the driver immediately stepping out to open the door. The level of discreet efficiency was staggering. Inside the plush leather interior of the car, as it pulled silently into the New York traffic, Serafina let out a long sigh and kicked off her diamond-encrusted heels. She turned to him, her face etched with concern. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she said, her voice laced with genuine regret. "That was the last thing I wanted to happen. I wanted you to meet my world on my terms, not like that. Not with her." Ethan looked at her. The goddess from the gala was gone again, replaced by the warm, caring Fina he'd come to know. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said, taking her hand. "But, Serafina Dubois, the face of L'Étoile du Soir, I think I have a bottle of your perfume in my bathroom that Brenda left behind." She winced. "Let's throw that one out. I'll get you something better." A small smile played on her lips. "I wanted to tell you, I loved being just Fina. With you, I felt like I wasn't a brand or a name. I was just a person. It was the most real thing I've felt in years." "You're still just Fina to me," he said, and he meant it. "The rest is just noise." He paused. "Though watching Brenda's face when she realized who you were, I admit that was a pretty spectacular bonus." Serafina laughed, a full, genuine laugh that echoed in the car. Her face was quite a picture. I almost felt sorry for her. "Don't," Ethan said, a hint of the old bitterness creeping in. "She wouldn't feel sorry for you." They got their pizza from a hole-in-the-wall place in the village, and Serafina, still in her couture gown, ate a slice folded in half on the curb, while Ethan, in his rented tux, laughed beside her. A lone paparazzo, who had somehow tracked them, snapped a photo from across the street. The next day, that photo would go viral, the heiress and the architect Serafina Dubois' downtown date night. It was a far more powerful statement than any red carpet appearance. The fallout was immediate and seismic. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Ethan's phone and email were exploding. Old colleagues from some who hadn't spoken to him in years were reaching out to reconnect. Headhunters from top architectural firms were suddenly interested in his boutique design philosophy. His small firm, Cole Design, was featured in a page 6 sidebar titled, "Who is Serafina's Mystery Man?" But the most shocking communication came from Brenda. It was a long, rambling text message sent at 3 a.m. "Ethan, I can't stop thinking about last night. Seeing you there so happy, it made me realize so much. I was a fool. I was so caught up in building the business, in the stress and the pressure, that I lost sight of what was important. I lost sight of you. Grant he's a distraction, a product of that world I thought I wanted. It's not real. What we had was real. I miss you. I miss us. I know I hurt you, but I'm willing to do anything to make it right. Please, can we just talk?" Ethan read the message twice, a bitter taste in his mouth. It was a masterwork of manipulation. Not once did she mention Serafina by name. She framed her sudden regret as an epiphany about him, not as a desperate, panicked reaction to his new partner's staggering status. She wasn't sorry for leaving him. She was sorry she'd left him before he'd traded up so spectacularly. It was the most Brenda thing she had ever done. He deleted the message without replying. The consequences for Brenda, however, were just beginning. The story of the confrontation at the gala, embellished and whispered through the city's elite circles, had cast her in a terrible light. She wasn't just an ambitious developer anymore. She was the cruel ex-wife who had tried to humiliate her unassuming former husband, only to be spectacularly shut down by a global icon. In a world built on image and perception, she had committed social suicide. Worse, the sudden spotlight on Ethan was bringing his past contributions to Walsh Properties into question. An influential architectural critic, intrigued by the story, wrote a blog post wondering why Ethan Cole, a man Serafina Dubois was championing, had such a thin portfolio for the last decade. He drew speculative but damning comparisons between Cole's early design style and the signature aesthetics of Walsh Properties' most successful buildings. The NDA prevented Ethan from speaking, but he didn't have to. The world was connecting the dots on its own. Whispers started among Brenda's investors. Was she really the visionary she claimed to be? Or was she just a ruthless marketer who had exploited her husband's talent and then cast him aside? The foundation of her carefully constructed empire, built on her singular image as a self-made titan, was beginning to crack. Grant Harrison, seeing the reputational damage splashing onto him, began to distance himself. A week after the gala, Ethan was in his apartment, sketching ideas for a new project, when his phone rang. It was an unknown number with a French country code. He answered cautiously. "Hello, medical. This is Jean-Luc Dubois." The voice was deep accent-scented and carried an unmistakable air of authority. "My daughter has told me a great deal about you. I believe it is time we met. I am in New York. My car will be at your address in 1 hour." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The noise from the outside world had finally breached the walls of their quiet romance. Ethan was no longer just dealing with the ghost of his ex-wife. He was about to face the king. The hour felt like 10 minutes. Ethan barely had time to shower and change into his best suit, a charcoal grey, well-tailored, but a world away from the bespoke luxury the Dubois family inhabited. He stood at his window, watching the street below. Exactly 60 minutes after the call, a black Maybach, even more imposing than the Audi, pulled up to the curb. It was so sleek and silent, it seemed to absorb the sounds of the city around it. The ride to the meeting was a masterclass in silent intimidation. The chauffeur, a large man in a dark suit, didn't speak. The car's interior was a cocoon of buttery leather and polished wood. They bypassed the gleaming commercial towers of Midtown and headed for the quiet, old-money elegance of the Upper East Side, stopping in front of a magnificent limestone townhouse just off Fifth Avenue. This wasn't a hotel, it was a private residence, the Dubois family's New York home. Ethan was led through a foyer that was more like a private museum, with a Miro on one wall and a Giacometti sculpture in an alcove. He was shown into a library on the second floor. Bookshelves soared from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in a marble fireplace, and in a high-backed armchair sat Jean-Luc Dubois. He was older than Ethan expected, perhaps in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, yet he exuded more power and elegance than anyone Ethan had ever met. He didn't rise, he simply gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming," he said, his voice the same deep baritone from the phone. His English was perfect, laced with only a faint aristocratic French accent. Mr. Dubois, the pleasure is mine, Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Jean-Luc observed him for a long moment, his gaze sharp and analytical. It was the look of a man who could assess the value of a company, a gemstone, or a person in a single glance. My daughter is very important to me, he began, his voice devoid of warmth. She is the face of our house, the heart of our legacy, but she is also a young woman who has lived her life in a cage, albeit a gilded one. Her world is filled with sycophants, opportunists, and men who see her as a prize to be won. He paused, letting the words sink in. You can understand then my concern. You appear in her life from nowhere, a man with a complicated past, a recent, and I hear, acrimonious divorce, a career that seems to have stalled for a decade. At each point was a precise, calculated jab. Jean-Luc had clearly done his homework. Ethan met his gaze. He would not be intimidated. Respectfully, sir, my past is my own, but it's not a secret. My career didn't stall. It was rerouted to help build someone else's success. A mistake I don't intend to make again. As for your daughter, I didn't seek her out. I met a woman named Fina in an art gallery. I fell for her intelligence, her kindness, and her spirit. The rest, the name, the legacy, that is your world, not mine. A flicker of something surprised respect crossed Jean-Luc's face before it was gone. A convenient sentiment. Jean-Luc said, his tone still skeptical. Many men would say such things. Perhaps, Ethan conceded. But I have a question for you, Mr. Dubois. Your daughter told me that for the first time in her life she felt she could be herself with me, that she didn't have to be Serafina, or the icon, as her father does. That not mean anything to you? The directness of the question seemed to disarm the older man. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. He was silent for a full minute. My daughter, she has a gift for seeing the truth in things, Jean-Luc said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. In art, in people. It is why she is not only the face of our house, but its soul. She tells me you are an architect of some talent. I like to think so, Ethan said. Our family's philanthropic arm, the Dubois Foundation, is planning its next major project. Jean-Luc continued, shifting the topic. A new museum for contemporary art and design in Brooklyn, a landmark project. The board has been reviewing proposals from the world's top firms. Snohetta, Renzo Piano, Herzog and de Meuron. He named the titans of the architectural world. My daughter has suggested that we review a proposal from you. Ethan was stunned. Fina had done that. She had put his name alongside the gods of his profession. That is an incredible honor, Ethan managed to say. It is not an offer, Mr. Cole. It is a test. Jean-Luc clarified his voice, once again sharp. The board is skeptical. You are unknown. Your firm is a one-man operation working out of an apartment. They see it as nepotism, a foolish whim of my daughter's. I have convinced them to grant you a chance. You will present your concept in 2 weeks. You will be judged not as my daughter's partner, but as an architect. If you fail, you will not only embarrass yourself, you will embarrass her. Do you understand the stakes? The pressure was immense. The opportunity was breathtaking. This was the commission of a lifetime, a chance to build something magnificent, to reclaim his name and his passion on the world stage. It was also a trial by fire, orchestrated by a man who was still deciding if he was worthy of his daughter. I understand perfectly, Ethan said, a fire he hadn't felt in years igniting in his chest. This was his language. This was his art. He wasn't afraid. He was energized. Good, Jean-Luc said, standing up, signaling the end of the meeting. Do not disappoint me. More importantly, do not disappoint her. As Ethan was shown out of the silent, opulent townhouse and back into the noise of the city, he felt a profound shift. The battle with Brenda was over. She had become a pathetic footnote in his past. The real challenge, the real future, was just beginning. He had 2 weeks to design a castle, not just to win the approval of the king, but to prove he was worthy of the queen. Meanwhile, Brenda's world was crumbling. The whispers about her business practices had grown into a roar. Crane's New York business ran a devastating expose titled The Ghost Architect of Walsh Properties. And while it couldn't prove anything definitively due to the NDA, it interviewed anonymous sources from her company and former colleagues of Ethan's from Somme. It painted a damning picture of a talented architect whose work was systematically appropriated by his then-wife. Investors grew nervous. A major pension fund that was the primary backer for her new flagship skyscraper project in Hudson Yards put a hold on their next round of funding, pending a full review of corporate governance and creative attribution. The project, Brenda's crowning achievement, ground to a halt. The banks started calling. Grant Harrison, who had co-invested publicly, announced he was pulling out of the deal and divesting from all interests connected to Walsh Properties, citing reputational risk. It was a brutal public betrayal, but one she had taught him well. Brenda was trapped in her Park Avenue penthouse, the panoramic views now feeling like a mockery. She was hemorrhaging money and, more importantly, status. She tried calling Ethan again this time, leaving a tearful, desperate voicemail begging him to release a statement, supporting her, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. She offered him money, a partnership, anything. Ethan listened to the voicemail, a sense of weary finality washing over him. He thought of the years he'd spent propping her up, the talent and energy he'd poured into her ambition. He thought of her sneering face at the gala, and then he thought of Fina's belief in him, of Jean-Luc's impossible, magnificent challenge. He deleted the message and got to work. He had a museum to design. The next 2 weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled creativity. Ethan's small apartment was transformed into a whirlwind of tracing paper foam core models and 3D renderings. The grey walls he had hidden behind for 2 years were now covered in vibrant sketches and bold concepts. The pilot light of his ambition had roared back to life, now a blazing inferno. He wasn't just designing a building, he was telling a story in glass, steel, and light. His concept for the Dubois Foundation Museum was audacious. Instead of a traditional monolithic structure, he envisioned a series of interconnected pavilions, each dedicated to a different medium: painting, sculpture, digital art, fashion, all flowing into a central sunlit atrium. The design was porous, intended to welcome the surrounding Brooklyn community in, rather than standing apart from it. The facade was a dynamic skin of photosensitive glass that would change opacity based on the time of day, making the building itself a living piece of art. He called it the Agora, a modern-day public square for creativity. Fina was his silent, supportive partner through it all. She respected his intense focus, bringing him food, making coffee, and just sitting quietly in the room, reading her presence, a calming anchor in his creative storm. She never offered an opinion on the design unless he asked, but when he did, her insights were brilliant. She spoke of how light would interact with a certain texture, or how a space would make a visitor feel, bringing the human element into his architectural vision. He realized her gift for seeing the truth in things was very real. They were building it together in a way. The day of the presentation arrived. The boardroom at the Dubois Foundation's headquarters was as intimidating as Jean-Luc's library. Ethan stood before a long, polished table occupied by a dozen stern-faced board members, including Jean-Luc Dubois himself, who sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Ethan was nervous, but as he began to speak, the nervousness melted away, replaced by pure passion. He didn't just present blueprints, he walked them through the experience. He spoke of light and shadow, of community and inspiration. He described how the museum would not just house art but foster it, with integrated studio spaces for emerging local artists. He showed them renderings of the building at dawn, at dusk, shimmering under the city lights. He poured every ounce of the talent Brenda had tried to bury into this one presentation. When he finished, the room was silent. The board members looked at each other, then at Jean-Luc. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. An older woman on the board, known for her sharp critiques, spoke first. "It's radical," she said, though not with disdain. "It's a departure from the monumentalism we usually favor." "Monumentalism can be a fortress," Ethan replied calmly. "Art should be a gateway, not a fortress." Jean-Luc stared at the final rendering projected on the screen, the agora at night, glowing like a lantern in the Brooklyn skyline. He was silent for a long time. "My daughter," he finally said, his voice quiet but resonant, "told me you don't design buildings. She said you design feelings. Looking at this, I finally understand what she meant." He looked down the table at the other board members. "We would be fools to let this vision go." He then looked directly at Ethan. "The commission is yours, Mr. Cole. Congratulations." A wave of relief and elation so profound, it almost buckled Ethan's knees, washed over him. He had done it. He had won, not because of who he was dating, but because of who he was. The news of Cole Design winning the Dubois Foundation Commission sent shockwaves through the architecture and real estate worlds. It was the ultimate vindication. Architectural Digest ran a cover story on him, hailing him as the visionary in the wings, finally giving him the credit that was so long overdue. The final nail in Brenda Walsh's professional coffin came a week later. With her Hudson Yards project in ruins and her reputation shredded, Walsh Properties defaulted on a major loan. The bank seized her primary assets, including the Park Avenue penthouse. The empire Ethan had silently built was dismantled in a matter of months. The last Ethan heard, she had sold what was left of her company for pennies on the dollar and moved to a smaller condo in Florida, a pariah in the city she had fought so hard to conquer. There was no triumph in hearing the news, only a quiet sense of closure, like closing a book he had finished long ago. 6 months later, Ethan stood with Fina on the construction site in Brooklyn. The foundation for the agora was being poured, a tangible beginning for his dream. He was no longer in the grey apartment in Hell's Kitchen. He and Fina had found a beautiful loft in Soho, a space filled with light art and laughter. Fina, dressed in casual jeans and a sweater, her arm linked through his, looked out at the bustling site. The press still followed them sometimes, but it was different now. They were no longer the heiress and her mystery man. They were a power couple, respected for their individual talents and the genuine partnership they so clearly shared. "It's going to be beautiful," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We're going to make it beautiful," he corrected her, squeezing her hand. He looked at her. His Fina, the woman, who had seen him when he was invisible, who had believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. She wasn't a status symbol or a prize. She was his partner, his home. He had lost a kingdom of glass and steel, built on ambition and lies, only to gain an empire of his own, built on a foundation of truth, respect, and love. The past was a scar, just like the painting in the gallery where they'd met. But looking at the future they were building together, he knew it was a beautiful, terrible scar that had, against all odds, led him here. And so Ethan Cole, the man who was once a ghost in his own life, stepped into the light, not as someone's shadow, but as a creator in his own right. His story isn't just about a shocking reveal at a fancy gala. It's a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured by bank accounts or designer labels. It's measured by integrity, by passion, and by the courage to be true to yourself, even when the world has tried to erase you. Brenda learned the hard way that when you treat people as stepping stones, you'll eventually find yourself with no ground left to stand on. What did you think of Brenda's downfall? Was it karma, or was it just business? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of vindication and unexpected love, please give this video a thumbs up Share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another real-life drama.
The pen felt heavy in Julian Croft's hand, its solid gold casing cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the boiling fury in his heart. Across the vast mahogany desk, his lawyer's face was a mask of professional concern. But Julian saw the judgment in his eyes. He didn't care. The woman seated beside him, Isabella, squeezed his other hand. Her touch, a comforting anchor in his sea of betrayal. With one final decisive stroke, he signed the document. A document that disinherited his wife of 8 years, Eleanor, and named Isabella Rossi. His mistress, the sole heir to his billion-dollar tech empire. He had just signed away his past, believing he was securing his future. He had no idea his pregnant wife was on a flight home carrying a secret that would shatter his new reality and expose a lie more venomous than he could ever imagine. Julian Croft had built his empire, Croft Innovations, from a garage startup into a global technology behemoth. His life was a testament to ruthless efficiency and a forward-gazing vision that saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. His penthouse apartment on Park Avenue was a monument to this success, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of Manhattan. It was a life of curated perfection, and Eleanor Vance had been its centerpiece. They had met at a university gala a decade ago. He was the intense, driven postgraduate student with a revolutionary idea. She was the brilliant art history major with a laugh that could disarm armies. Eleanor was his calm, his sanctuary. She understood the man behind the mogul, the one who still wrestled with insecurities from a childhood spent in the shadow of mediocrity. For 8 years, their marriage had been the one part of his life not governed by profit margins and quarterly reports. It was, he believed, his greatest merger. But lately, cracks had begun to appear in the gilded cage. The pressure was immense. At 48, Julian was obsessed with legacy. He had built an empire, but he had no one to leave it to. The topic of children had evolved from a tender, hopeful whisper into a source of palpable tension. They had tried for years. They had seen specialists in New York, London, and Geneva. Each negative test, each sympathetic but clinical explanation from a doctor, chipped away at something vital between them. Julian, a man who could bend markets to his will, could not command biology. The failure gnawed at him, twisting his ambition into a bitter, quiet resentment that often settled over their dinner table like an unwelcome guest. Eleanor felt it too. She saw the way Julian looked at his business partners with their children, the strained smile he offered at baptisms and birthdays. She carried the weight of their shared disappointment, but she also carried the scars of countless invasive procedures and the emotional whiplash of hope and despair. She suggested adoption surrogacy, a life focused on their philanthropic foundation, but Julian was stubbornly traditional. He wanted a child of his blood, an heir. It was into this fragile ecosystem that Isabella Rossi had arrived. Hired as a high-level executive assistant 6 months prior, she was everything Eleanor wasn't, at least on the surface. She was raven-haired, sharp-edged, and possessed an ambition that mirrored Julian's own. She spoke his language of acquisitions, of market disruption, of legacy. She worked late, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, and looked at him not as a husband, but as a king. The affair began subtly. A shared bottle of scotch after a late-night deal closing. A hand lingering a moment too long on his arm. Soon their clandestine meetings became Julian's escape from the quiet disappointment waiting for him at home. Isabella didn't see him as a failure in any capacity. She saw him as a titan, and she told him so, her words a balm on his wounded pride. Then came the call that took Eleanor away. Her mother, living in a quiet town in Northern California, had suffered a severe stroke. Eleanor was distraught, packing a bag in a tearful rush. "I have to go, Julian. She's not responsive. The doctors don't know." Julian had held her, offered the private jet, and played the part of the supportive husband. "Go. Take as long as you need. Don't worry about anything here." But as he watched the jet ascend into the clouds, a cold part of him felt a sense of relief. It was a temporary reprieve from the silent accusations and the shared grief that had become their life. Eleanor was gone for 3 weeks. Her calls were filled with the hushed, anxious energy of a hospital vigil. She spoke of her mother's small improvements, the grueling reality of rehabilitation, and how much she missed him. Julian listened, offered platitudes, but his mind was elsewhere. He was spending his evenings with Isabella, who was slowly and methodically making his penthouse her own. She replaced Eleanor's favorite lilies with exotic orchids. She learned to cook his favorite steak, a perfect medium rare. She filled the silence not with sorrow, but with seductive whispers about the future. It was during that 3rd week that Isabella planted the most poisonous seed. One evening, as they lay in the bed he had once shared only with his wife, she traced a pattern on his chest. "It must be so hard for you," she murmured, her voice laced with faux sympathy. "All this pressure for an heir. And Eleanor, she's a wonderful woman, of course, but perhaps her focus is elsewhere." "What do you mean?" Julian asked, his voice rough. Isabella feigned hesitation. "Oh, it's nothing. Just a friend of mine saw her in San Francisco last week. She wasn't at the hospital. She was having lunch with a man. They seemed very close, laughing." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I'm sure it was innocent. A friend from college, perhaps. But with everything you've been through, you deserve someone who is 100% devoted to you, Julian, to your legacy." The seed found fertile ground in Julian's paranoia and ego. A lunch. While her mother was fighting for her life, the thought was a spark, and Isabella fanned it into a wildfire over the next few days with more innocent observations and fabricated concerns. The final brutal blow came in the form of a single photograph sent from an anonymous number, an image Isabella had expertly commissioned and doctored. It showed Eleanor sitting at an outdoor cafe, smiling at a handsome, generic-looking man. It was cleverly edited, a composite of 2 different pictures, but to Julian's enraged and suspicious mind, it was irrefutable proof. His world already fractured, shattered completely. The woman he had loved his sanctuary was not just barren, but a liar, a cheat. In his mind, her inability to give him a child was now reframed as a deliberate, malicious betrayal. She had been playing him for a fool all along. The fury that seized him was absolute. He would not be made a fool of. He would excise her from his life, from his legacy, as cleanly as a surgeon removing a tumor. That afternoon he called his personal lawyer, Marcus Thorne. "Marcus," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "I need you to draw up a new will, and I want to start divorce proceedings, immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Julian, is everything all right?" "What's happened with Eleanor?" "Eleanor is no longer a concern of mine." Julian stated the words like chips of ice. "I'm making a change, a complete change. I want everything, every stock, every property, every last dollar, to go to one person, Isabella Rossi." Marcus Thorne was a man who operated in shades of grey, but he believed in the black-and-white sanctity of the law and the institution of marriage. He'd known Julian for 15 years, had drafted the original prenuptial agreement, and had always admired the genuine affection between Julian and Eleanor. This call felt like a lightning strike from a clear blue sky. "Julian, this is extremely sudden," Marcus said, his voice cautious. He was sitting in his leather-upholstered office overlooking the East River, a bastion of old money stability. "Divorce and a complete overhaul of your estate plan are monumental decisions. Perhaps we should discuss this after you've had some time to—" "I don't need time, Marcus," Julian snapped. "I need a lawyer. Are you my lawyer or not?" "Of course, Julian, but it is my duty to advise you to proceed with caution. Disinheriting a spouse is a complex and often contested process. Eleanor has rights. Her rights ended when she betrayed me," Julian growled. He relayed the story Isabella had crafted for him, the secret lunches, the emotional distance, the damning photograph. He presented it not as suspicion, but as cold, hard fact. Marcus listened, the story sounding thin and suspiciously convenient. "A photograph can be misleading, Julian. Have you spoken to Eleanor about this? Have you asked for her side of the story?" "There is no other side." Julian roared, his voice echoing in his sterile, minimalist office at Croft Innovations. Isabella, who was seated on the plush sofa across from him, gave him a look of profound sympathy, a silent applause for his conviction. "She's been lying to me for God knows how long. While I was building this company for us, for our future, she was gallivanting. I'm done, Marcus. Draw up the papers. Name Isabella Rossi as my sole beneficiary. She understands what I'm building. She is loyal." The word loyal hung in the air, thick with irony. Isabella lowered her gaze, perfecting the image of a humble, devoted servant caught in the crossfire of her benefactor's turmoil. Inside her heart hammered with triumph. It was all working, every carefully placed word, every fabricated piece of evidence. Her campaign had been a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She started by subtly isolating Julian. She would accidentally misplace phone messages from Eleanor's sister or friends, creating a sense of distance. She would interrupt Julian when he was about to call his wife, citing an urgent work matter that required his immediate attention, reinforcing the idea that she was essential to his professional life, while Eleanor was an external distraction. She preyed on his deepest insecurity, his desire for a legacy. "A man like you, Julian," she'd said one night, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "You're not meant to have your name die with you. You're a creator, a builder. Your bloodline should continue. It's a tragedy that Eleanor couldn't give you that." She never insulted Eleanor directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she wrapped her attacks in pity and concern. "I feel so sorry for her," she would sigh. "It must be so difficult feeling like you can't give your husband the one thing he truly wants. It can make a woman desperate, make her look for validation elsewhere." The doctored photograph was her masterpiece. She had hired a freelance graphic designer online, a ghost on the internet, paid in cryptocurrency, untraceable and anonymous. She found a picture of Eleanor from a social media account of one of her friends from years ago, one taken on a trip to San Francisco. She then found a stock photo of a man at a cafe. The merge was seamless. The background, the lighting, the shadows, it was perfect. She sent it to a burner phone she'd bought for cash, and then forwarded it to Julian's number before snapping the burner in half and discarding it in a public trash can miles away. It was a simple, devastatingly effective piece of theater. Now, sitting in Julian's office, She watched as he dismantled his life over the phone. She had to play her part perfectly. When he hung up with Marcus, his face was a thundercloud of rage and resolution. He turned to her, his eyes searching for confirmation that he was doing the right thing. Isabella rose from the sofa and walked to him, placing her hands on his chest. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and seemingly filled with a mixture of love and trepidation. "Julian, are you sure?" She whispered the performance of a lifetime. "This is so much. I never wanted to be the cause of any pain between you two. Maybe you should wait. Talk to her." It was the perfect move. By urging caution, she appeared selfless, cementing his belief that she was not a gold digger, but a woman who truly cared for him. "No," Julian said, his voice firm as he took her hands in his. "The pain was already there. You just opened my eyes to it. You've shown me what real loyalty is, Isabella, what real devotion looks like. This isn't about you causing pain. This is about you being the future. My future." He pulled her closer, sealing his decision with a kiss. It was not a kiss of passion, but of defiance. A kiss that tasted of anger, betrayal, and the billions of dollars that were now within Isabella's grasp. She returned it, pouring every ounce of her feigned adoration into the embrace, her mind already redecorating the penthouse and calculating the market value of Croft Innovation stock. The serpent had not only whispered, she had been heard, and her venom was now coursing through the veins of an empire. The signing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, 2 days after the initial call. Marcus Thorne had worked with his usual diligence, but he had dragged his feet as much as professionally possible, hoping Julian might come to his senses. He had drafted the documents as instructed, but he had also prepared a file outlining the likely legal challenges, the cost of a contentious divorce from a long-term spouse, and the potential PR fallout for a public figure like Julian Croft. He was hoping to make one last appeal to reason. The meeting took place not in Marcus's warm, wood-paneled office, but in a sterile, impersonal conference room at the Croft Innovations headquarters. The room was a glass box on the 50th floor, overlooking the city, designed to make visitors feel small and Julian feel powerful. A long, black granite table dominated the space, its polished surface reflecting the grim faces of the 2 men seated at one end. Julian was dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, his face set like stone. He hadn't slept, and dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his posture was rigid, unyielding. Across from him, Marcus looked tired and grave. His briefcase open, the offending documents laid out in a neat funereal stack. "Before we proceed, Julian," Marcus began, his voice calm and even, "I must, as your counsel, advise you one last time against this course of action. You are about to sign away 8 years of marriage and partnership based on a single photograph and unsubstantiated claims. If you proceed with this, the divorce will be brutal. Eleanor will fight this, and a judge may look very unfavorably on your attempt to leave her with nothing. It will be seen as punitive." "Let it be punitive," Julian said, his voice a low growl. "She deserves nothing. She made a fool of me. And Miss Rosie." Marcus continued, his gaze flicking toward the door. "To name her your sole heir while you are still legally married is an extraordinary move. It exposes your estate to immense risk. It essentially paints a target on her back for any legal challenge Eleanor, or anyone else for that matter, might bring forward." Just then the conference room door opened, and Isabella Rossi entered. She was the picture of quiet elegance and solemnity, dressed in a conservative navy blue dress. She carried a leather-bound notepad, as if she were there to take minutes, a subtle performance of her subordinate role, even in this moment of ultimate victory. "Marcus," she said with a polite, sad smile. "Julian, I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're right on time," Julian said, his tone softening instantly. He gestured to the chair beside him, a seat of honor that was not lost on Marcus. Isabella sat placing her hands demurely in her lap. She looked at Marcus with an expression of earnest concern. "Mr. Thorne, I want you to know I have told Julian this is not necessary. My feelings for him are not contingent on any financial arrangement. I am here for him emotionally. That is all I have ever wanted." Marcus stared back at her, his experienced eyes seeing through the flawless performance to the cold, calculating core beneath. He had seen her type before, but rarely were they this skilled. He turned back to Julian. "Julian, think about what you are doing. The company, your board. This will create instability. It's reckless." "Reckless," Julian scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Reckless was trusting my wife. Reckless was wasting years of my life with a woman who was laughing at me behind my back. This," he said, tapping a finger on the top page of the will, "is not reckless. This is control. This is me taking back control of my life and my legacy." He picked up the expensive fountain pen laid out for him. The nib hovered over the signature line. In that fraction of a second, a fleeting image of Eleanor flashed through his mind. Her laugh on their honeymoon in Italy, the way she looked at him across a crowded room, the comfortable slants they used to share. It was a ghost of a memory, quickly vaporized by the searing heat of his anger. He thought of the photograph of her smile directed at another man, and his grip on the pen tightened. Isabella watched, her breath held. This was the culmination of months of patient predatory work, the careful erosion of a marriage, the stoking of an insecure man's ego, the brilliant, simple deception. Her future was balanced on the tip of that pen. Julian's eyes met hers. She gave him the smallest, most encouraging nod, her expression a perfect blend of love, support, and sorrow for his pain. That was all it took. He pressed the nib to the paper. The scratch of pen on parchment was the only sound in the vast, silent room. He signed his full name, Julian Alexander Croft, with a firm, angry stroke. He then pushed the document across the table toward Marcus. "Witnessed and notarized," he commanded. "File the divorce papers this afternoon." Marcus Thorne looked down at the signature. It felt like he was looking at the scene of a crime. He picked up his own pen, and with the heavy heart of a man who knows he is enabling a catastrophe, he signed his name as a witness. His assistant, who had been waiting outside, was called in to add her signature and the notary stamp. It was done. In the space of 10 minutes, a marriage was condemned, a partnership erased, and a fortune redirected. Isabella placed a gentle hand on Julian's arm. "I'm here for you," she whispered, the promise of a predator who had just successfully claimed her prize. Julian covered her hand with his, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He felt purged, cleansed by the fire of his own rage. He believed he had cut out the cancer and saved himself. He had no way of knowing he had just invited in the plague. The private jet descended smoothly through the thick blanket of clouds hanging over New York City. For the first time in 4 weeks, Eleanor Vance felt a flutter of hope. Her mother was stable. The long, grueling ordeal was far from over, but the immediate crisis had passed, and she was finally on her way home. In her purse, She carried a small, sealed envelope from a clinic in San Francisco, a secret she had been holding on to for 7 weeks, a joy she wanted to share with Julian in person. She had decided not to tell him about the pregnancy over the phone. Their conversations had been strained, clipped. She'd attributed it to the stress he was under, running the company alone while she was away, dealing with her family crisis. She thought the news delivered face-to-face would be the balm that soothed all the recent tension. It was the miracle they had prayed for, the solution to the problem that had been slowly tearing them apart. She imagined his shock, then the slow dawn of disbelief, followed by explosive joy. She pictured them holding each other, the fractures of the past year, healing in an instant. She hadn't called to say she was coming. She wanted to surprise him. The car service she'd arranged took her from the private airfield straight to their Park Avenue penthouse. As the elevator ascended, her heart beat faster with anticipation. She used her key, a familiar comfort, and let herself in. The first thing she noticed was the silence. It was a heavy, unfamiliar silence, not the peaceful quiet of an empty home, but the oppressive stillness of a space that held its breath. The second thing she noticed was the scent. Her favorite lilies were gone, replaced by the cloying, heavy fragrance of orchids. "Julian!" she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the marble foyer. She set her bag down, a prickle of unease on her skin. She walked into the grand living area, and then she saw her. Isabella Rossi was standing by the panoramic window, a glass of wine in her hand, looking out at the city as if she owned it. She was wearing one of Eleanor's silk robes, not a similar one. It was the specific one Julian had bought for her on their anniversary, a deep emerald green. It hung on Isabella's frame differently, but it was unmistakably hers. Isabella turned slowly, a look of mild surprise on her face that was too practiced to be genuine. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth as cream, "we weren't expecting you." The single word sent a jolt of ice through Eleanor's veins. She looked around the room. A man's jacket, not Julian's style, was slung over a chair. A pair of high heels she didn't recognize were kicked off near the sofa. The space felt subtly but fundamentally altered, rearranged to someone else's taste. "What are you doing here, Isabella?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight, all thoughts of her joyful surprise evaporating. "And why are you wearing my robe?" "Julian felt I should be comfortable," Isabella said with a small, self-satisfied smile. She took a deliberate sip of her wine. "I've been staying here for a little while, to support him. He's been going through a very difficult time." The implication was clear, a slap in the face. Eleanor's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a hostile takeover of her home, of her life. "Where is my husband?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising. As if on cue, Julian walked into the room from the direction of their master bedroom. He was knotting a tie, dressed for an evening out. He stopped dead when he saw Eleanor. The color drained from his face, replaced by a complex storm of shock anger and something that looked horribly like guilt. "Eleanor," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here? I thought you were in California." "My mother is stable. I came home. To my husband. To my home," she said, her eyes darting from Julian's cold expression to Isabella's triumphant smirk. The scene before her was so brazen, so utterly disrespectful, that she could barely process it. "Julian, what is going on? Why is she here? Why is she wearing my clothes?" Julian took a deep breath, his features hardening into the ruthless mask he wore in the boardroom. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon, so sudden. Isabella's presence emboldened him. "Isabella is here because I invited her," He said, his words precise and cruel. She lives here now. Eleanor felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She physically staggered back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. Lives here? What are you talking about? Julian, this is our home. We are married. A marriage that, as far as I'm concerned, is over. He declared, the sentence landing with the force of a physical blow. I've instructed my lawyer to file for divorce. Divorce. The word was a choked whisper. Based on what? We were fine before I left. Julian, what has she been telling you? She looked at Isabella, a sudden horrifying understanding dawning in her eyes. This was not a random affair. This was a coup. She hasn't told me anything that I didn't already suspect. Julian lied, his voice thick with self-righteous anger. Don't play the innocent victim, Eleanor. I know about your lunches in San Francisco. I know about your lies. Eleanor stared at him, utterly bewildered. Lunches, what are you talking about? I was at the hospital with my mother day and night. I barely left her side. Please, Eleanor, don't insult my intelligence, he sneered. I have proof. Now I think it would be best for everyone if you collected some of your things and left. Isabella and I have dinner reservations. The casual cruelty of that last sentence shattered Eleanor's shock and replaced it with a surge of white-hot fury. This man, to whom she had given a decade of her life, was discarding her like a failed business venture based on lies whispered by the woman wearing her robe in her own living room. The injustice of it was breathtaking. But as her world crumbled around her, her hand instinctively went to her abdomen, a protective gesture over the secret she still carried. The joyous news she had flown across the country to deliver had just become her last, most desperate weapon. The air in the penthouse was thick with tension, a toxic cocktail of betrayal and disbelief. Eleanor looked at the two of them. Julian, her husband, his face a mask of cold fury. Isabella, the usurper, looking on with an expression of feigned pity that was more insulting than open contempt. Dinner reservations? Eleanor repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You're throwing me out of my home, ending our marriage over a lie you haven't even given me the chance to refute, and you're worried about dinner reservations. There's nothing to refute, Julian said, taking a step forward so he was standing slightly in front of Isabella, a protective stance that cut Eleanor to the core. I know what you've been doing. The marriage is over. It's been over for a long time. We've both known it. No, you may have felt that way. Eleanor shot back, her voice gaining strength. I thought we were going through a difficult time, a challenge we were supposed to face together. I didn't realize you were using it as an excuse to bring your assistant into our bed. Isabella gasped theatrically. That's not fair. Julian was hurting. He needed someone. He needed his wife, Eleanor yelled, finally losing her composure. He needed the woman who stood by him when he had nothing but an idea and a rented garage. The woman who held him when his father died. Don't you dare talk to me about what my husband needed. Julian flinched at the mention of his father, a rare crack in his armor. Leave her out of this, he commanded. This is between you and me. You were unfaithful. I was not, Eleanor cried, her frustration boiling over. I was with my sick mother, I can prove it. Hospital records, visitor logs, my sister Sarah was with me the entire time. Who fed you this poison, Julian? Her. She pointed a trembling finger at Isabella. It doesn't matter. I've made my decision. Julian said, his voice clipped and final. In fact, I've already formalized it. I've signed a new will. Everything. The company, this apartment, the house in the Hamptons, it all goes to Isabella. If the divorce announcement was a punch to the gut, this was a dagger to the heart. It wasn't just about the money. It was the complete and utter erasure of their life together. He was not just ending their marriage. He was wiping it from history. The sheer totality of the betrayal stole her breath. She looked at his face, searching for any flicker of the man she had married, but saw only a cold, resolute stranger. All her plans, all her hopes for their reunion, lay in ashes at her feet. All except one. Her hand, which had been resting on her stomach, tightened. The secret she carried was no longer a joyful gift to be given, but a shield to be wielded. It was the one piece of truth in this room full of lies. Her demeanor shifted. The frantic anger receded, replaced by a chilling calm that unnerved Julian more than her shouting had. She stood up straight, lifted her chin, and looked him directly in the eye. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And you are doing it because you are a coward. You couldn't face our problems, so you found an easy, flattering escape. You've chosen to believe a lie because it absolves you of your own failures." "My failures?" he scoffed. "I have built an empire. You have failed to give me the one thing that matters." The cruel words, the one unspoken accusation that had haunted their marriage for years, were finally out in the open. But now they had no power over her. A small, humorless smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Is that what you think?" she asked softly. "That I failed? That we failed?" She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. Isabella watched a flicker of genuine unease crossing her features for the first time. This was not the broken, weeping wife she had anticipated. "You talk about your legacy," Eleanor continued, her voice resonating with a power she didn't know she possessed. "You've just signed it all away to her. But you've made a grave miscalculation. You see, your legacy isn't something you can sign over with a pen." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Then she delivered the bombshell. "I'm pregnant, Julian," she said. "I'm 12 weeks pregnant. With your son." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian froze his face, a canvas of utter shock. The words seemed to hang in the air, nonsensical and impossible. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. Isabella's mask of composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened in panic, darting between Eleanor and Julian. This was a variable she had never accounted for. An heir. A legitimate biological heir. It was the one thing that could undo everything she had worked for. Julian was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper. "No. That's not possible." He shook his head, denial warring with a flicker of desperate hope. He looked at her stomach, as if he could see the proof with his own eyes. Then the poison Isabella had fed him for weeks resurfaced, twisting the miraculous news into another weapon against her. His shock curdled back into suspicion. "My son," he sneered, the words dripping with venom. "How can I be sure of that? After all, you had plenty of time for lunch in San Francisco." The accusation was the most vile, most painful thing he had ever said to her. To have their miracle, the child they had yearned for, thrown back in her face as a symbol of her supposed infidelity, was a cruelty beyond measure. Any remaining love she had for the man standing before her died in that moment. "You dare," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "You dare to question that. Prove it," Julian snarled, goaded by the panicked look Isabella was now shooting him. You want me to believe you. Prove he's mine." Eleanor stared at him, her heart broken, but her resolve forged into steel. He wanted proof. She would give him proof. She would not only prove this child was his, but she would also expose the web of lies that had led them to this ugly, ruinous moment. She reached into her purse and pulled out the sealed envelope from the clinic. It wasn't the proof he demanded, but it was the beginning of her fight. It was a confirmation of pregnancy and a record of her first ultrasound. She threw it on the table between them. "This is just the start," she said, her voice like ice. "You want a DNA test, Julian? You'll get it. And when the results come back and you finally realize the truth, I will make you regret this day for the rest of your miserable life." With that, she turned her back on him and the woman wearing her robe and walked out of the apartment that was no longer her home, leaving the bombshell of her pregnancy to detonate in the ruins of their marriage. Eleanor didn't just walk out. She walked into action. The shock and heartbreak galvanized her, transforming her grief into a cold, clear-eyed mission. She didn't check into a hotel. She went straight to the only person she knew she could trust. Implicitly, her younger sister Sarah, a sharp-witted financial journalist who lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn. Sarah opened the door to find her sister pale and trembling, but with a fire in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. Between sobs, Eleanor recounted the entire nightmarish scene: the robe, the divorce, the new will, the vile accusation about their unborn child. Sarah listened, her expression hardening from sisterly concern to journalistic fury. "He did what?" she said, her voice dangerously low. "A new will, based on a photo. Oh, this doesn't just smell bad. Elle, this stinks of a professional setup." That night, they didn't just mourn the death of a marriage. They planned a war. The first order of business was what Julian had demanded proof. The next morning, Eleanor contacted her obstetrician, who arranged for a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. It was a simple blood draw from her and a cheek swab from Julian. Getting Julian's sample was the first hurdle. Eleanor's lawyer, a formidable woman named Clara Finch, whom she hired the same day, sent a formal, legally binding request to Marcus Thorne. Faced with a legal demand tied to a potential heir, Julian had no choice but to comply. A medical courier was dispatched to his office, and the sample was collected under sterile, witnessed conditions that would be admissible in court. The lab quoted a turnaround time of 7 to 10 business days. For Eleanor, it felt like a lifetime. But she and Sarah didn't just wait. They started digging. "Isabella Rossi," Sarah said, typing the name into her laptop as they sat in her home office, surrounded by takeout containers and mugs of stale coffee. "If she's this good, she has a history. People like this don't just appear out of nowhere. They have a playbook." The initial search was fruitless. Isabella's online presence was meticulously curated and deeply professional. Her LinkedIn profile was a glowing resume of positions at high-powered firms with impeccable recommendations. There were no messy social media accounts, no tagged photos from wild parties, no digital loose threads. She was a ghost. "Too perfect," Sarah muttered. "It's a digital facade. Let's look for the cracks." They started with her employment history, cross-referencing the dates she listed. Sarah called a contact at a financial paper in Chicago, where Isabella claimed to have worked for a CEO named Robert Miller for 3 years. "Miller," the contact said over the phone. "Yeah, I remember that story. Miller had a huge falling out with his family, tried to write his wife and kids out of his will. He had this new protégé he was leaving everything to. The family sued, claimed undue influence. It got ugly. Settled out of court, sealed. The protégé's name was never public, but I remember hearing whispers it was his executive assistant. The timeline matched perfectly. Isabella had left that job right after the settlement. There was no public record, but it was their first real lead. She had done this before. Next, they tackled the photograph. He said he had proof. Eleanor recalled the memory, still a fresh wound. A photo of me having lunch with a man in San Francisco. When you were with me at the hospital. Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Okay, let's think. If it's a fake, it had to be made from a real photo of you. Where would she get one? They scoured Eleanor's social media, but she rarely posted. Then Sarah had a thought. Our friends, our cousins. Let's check their accounts go back years. For 2 days, they scrolled through thousands of photos. Finally, on the Facebook page of a distant cousin, they found it. A picture from a family trip to San Francisco 4 years prior. There was Eleanor, sitting at an outdoor cafe smiling. She was wearing the same blouse, her hair was the same length. In the original photo, she was smiling at her mother, who was sitting across from her. There, Sarah whispered, pointing at the screen. That's the source image. I bet my career on it. The final piece was proving Isabella's direct involvement. This required more than just amateur sleuthing. Clara Finch, Eleanor's lawyer, recommended a private investigator, a former NYPD detective named Frank Russo, with a reputation for being a bloodhound. Frank was a gruff, no-nonsense man who listened to their story without expression. When they showed him their findings, he grunted in appreciation. Good work, he said. Now let me see what I can find with a little more persuasion. Frank focused on Isabella's finances. He discovered a single untraceable cryptocurrency payment of $5,000 made about 5 weeks ago to an account linked to a network of freelance graphic designers known for discreet work. The payment was routed through multiple anonymous wallets, but Frank had his own sources. He found the digital artist a kid in Eastern Europe who, when faced with the threat of being exposed for corporate espionage, quickly confessed to creating a composite photograph for a client who paid in Bitcoin. He had saved the original files. He emailed them to Frank. It was the original photo of Eleanor, the stock photo of the man, and the final damning composite. While Frank was closing in, Eleanor got the call from the lab. The results were in. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she asked Clara to arrange the final meeting. She didn't want the results sent in an email or read over the phone. She wanted to see Julian Croft's face when he learned the truth. All of it. Clara Finch arranged a meeting at Marcus Thorne's office. The purpose was stated simply: to present the results of the paternity test and discuss the terms of the divorce. Julian, confident the test would prove him right, agreed immediately. Isabella, smelling the final victory, insisted on being there to support him. It was the trap Eleanor and her team had so carefully laid. They weren't just coming with a DNA test. They were coming with an arsenal. The atmosphere in Marcus Thorne's largest conference room was as cold and brittle as a winter morning. The long mahogany table, polished to a mirror, shine reflected the tense faces of everyone present. Julian Croft sat at the head of the table, flanked by Isabella Rossi, who looked the part of the concerned, supportive partner. On the other side sat Eleanor, poised and radiating a steely calm that was more intimidating than any outburst. Beside her were her sister Sarah and her lawyer Clara Finch, a woman whose sharp intelligence was evident in her every precise movement. Marcus Thorne, acting as a neutral arbiter, sat between the two factions, a single sealed manila envelope on the table before him. We are here today to review the results of the court-ordered prenatal paternity test. Marcus began, his voice heavy with formality. The chain of custody has been verified, and the results have been delivered directly to my office from the laboratory. Julian leaned forward slightly, a smug, anticipatory look on his face. He glanced at Eleanor, expecting to see fear or desperation. Instead, he saw only a serene, almost pitying look in her eyes. It unnerved him. Isabella placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, a gesture of solidarity that now looked under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the law office, practiced and artificial. Marcus picked up the envelope, slit it open with a letter opener, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He cleared his throat. The analysis compared the DNA profile of the fetus with the DNA profiles of Eleanor Vance and Julian Croft. He read aloud, his voice steady. The results are as follows. The probability of paternity is 99.998%. He looked up, his gaze landing directly on Julian. Mr. Croft, you are the father. The silence in the room was absolute. Julian stared, his mind refusing to accept the words. 99.999%. The number was definitive, scientific, irrefutable. It was a fact as solid and unyielding as the granite of his office building. He was the father. His deepest desire, a biological heir, had been granted. And he had, in his blind rage, called it a lie and accused his wife of the ultimate betrayal. He turned to look at Eleanor, his mouth opening and closing silently. He saw not triumph in her eyes, but a profound, bottomless disappointment. The weight of his cruelty, of his monstrous mistake, crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. Isabella went pale. Her grip on Julian's arm tightened like a vice. This was the one outcome she couldn't spin, the one fact she couldn't manipulate. Congratulations, Julian, Clara Finch said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. You're going to be a father, which brings us to the second matter of business. Before Julian could even form a response, Sarah slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a side-by-side comparison, the photo of Eleanor smiling at her mother, and the doctored photo of her smiling at a strange man. Recognize this, Julian? Sarah asked, her voice dripping with contempt. This is the proof you based the end of your marriage on. On the left is the original taken 4 years ago. On the right is the fabrication you received. A rather clumsy one once you know what to look for. Clara Finch placed a file folder on the table. And this, she said, tapping it, is a sworn affidavit from the graphic designer who was paid $5,000 in cryptocurrency to create that fake photograph. A payment which our investigator has traced back through a chain of digital wallets originating from an account set up by one Isabella Rossi. Isabella recoiled as if she'd been struck. That's a lie. It's absurd. We also have a statement, Clara continued, her voice relentless, from a source in Chicago detailing your involvement with CEO Robert Miller. A nearly identical pattern of behavior, alienating him from his family and persuading him to alter his will in your favor before a sealed out-of-court settlement was reached. You have a history of this, Miss Rossi. It's not love. It's a profession. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Isabella's carefully constructed world. Her face, usually a mask of serene control, began to crumble. Panic flickered in her eyes. She looked at Julian, her expression pleading. Julian, darling, they're lying. She stammered, her voice losing its silky quality. They're trying to turn you against me. It's a conspiracy. You can't believe them. But Julian wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the 2 photos on the tablet, the irrefutable proof of the lie he had so eagerly consumed. He saw it all with horrifying clarity. Now the whispers, the concerns, the perfectly timed delivery of the fake photo. He had not been a victim of betrayal by his wife. He had been the willing, arrogant mark in a long con. He had allowed his pride, his insecurity, and his ego to be played like a fiddle. He finally turned to look at Isabella. But he wasn't seeing the devoted, adoring woman he thought he knew. He was seeing a predator, a parasite who had attached herself to him and poisoned him against the one person who had ever truly loved him. "You," he whispered the word, filled with a dawning, sickening horror. "It was all you." Marcus Thorne, seeing the complete implosion, cleared his throat again. "Miss Rossi," he said, his tone now glacial. "Given this evidence of potential fraud and undue influence, I believe your presence is no longer required. In fact, I would strongly advise you to retain legal counsel immediately." Isabella stood up her chair, scraping harshly against the floor. Her composure was gone, replaced by a mask of pure reptilian fury. She glared at Eleanor, her eyes burning with hatred for the woman who had outplayed her. Without another word, she turned and fled the room. Julian Croft sat alone at the head of the table, a king in a collapsed kingdom. He looked across the vast expanse of polished wood at Eleanor, the mother of his child, the woman he had wronged in the most profound way imaginable. "Eleanor," he began, his voice broken, raspy. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Eleanor held up a hand, silencing him. The apology was too little, too late, a single drop of rain on a raging inferno. "Save it, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of heat, but heavy with finality. "The only thing we have left to discuss is the custody of my child and the dissolution of our marriage." She stood up, a portrait of dignity and strength, and walked out of the room, leaving her husband to drown in the ruin he had built with his own 2 hands. In the end, there was no dramatic reconciliation. Trust once shattered so completely cannot be glued back together. Eleanor went on to give birth to a beautiful, healthy boy named Leo. Julian, stripped of his pride and arrogance, was a broken man. He tore up the will that named Isabella heir and dissolved the divorce proceedings against Eleanor, but the damage was done. Isabella Rossi vanished last, seen boarding a flight to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving a trail of fraud for the authorities to follow. Julian funneled his immense resources into begging for forgiveness. He funded a new wing at the hospital in her mother's name. He set up a trust for Leo so vast it was staggering. He attended every therapy session, read every book, and did everything he could to become a better man. But Eleanor, while allowing him to be a father to their son, could never again be his wife. She had found a strength she never knew she possessed, forged in the fires of betrayal. She had learned that her legacy wasn't tied to a powerful husband, but to the child she was raising and the unbreakable spirit she had discovered within herself. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest betrayals often come not from our enemies, but from the insecurities we allow others to exploit. The truth always has a way of coming to light, but sometimes it arrives only to illuminate the ashes of what has already been burned to the ground. What would you have done in Eleanor's shoes? Could you ever forgive a betrayal so deep? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story of justice, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas every week. Thank you for listening.